Are you wondering about the Sassafras Science series? Will it work for your family? What does it look like to use it? And how did it all get started? That's exactly what we're covering in today's Season 10 bonus episode. Hi, I'm Paige Hudson, and you're listening to the Tips for Homeschool Science Show, where we're breaking down the lofty ideals of teaching science into building blocks you can use in your homeschool. So, before we chat a little bit about Sassafras Science and how the series works, I wanted to share with you all the history of how it even came about. Honestly, when we released the first volume 10 years ago in 2013, we had no idea what the response would be to Sassafras Science. And you guys have made it amazing. This journey has been incredible, and I am so glad to share the twins with you guys and their journey through science. But the whole idea for the Sassafras Science series kind of began as a seed in my head about a year or two after we started elemental science, in that I loved the classical way of educating our kids. It really spoke to me and my analytical side. But then I was introduced to this amazing resource called a living book for history. And I thought, we really need this for science. And I looked around, and the only thing I could find that was a living book for science was written 100 years ago, which they were fantastic books and great stories, but there's been a few advancements in science since then, and we talked about that. So it was at that point that I kind of wanted to be able to create a living book series that would do for science what some of the living book series had done for history. And so I had this idea in my head, but your girl is not an adventure novel writer. I am a technical, analytical, nonfiction type writer. I've dabbled in fiction here and there, but to write an entire volume, an entire book in a series, I knew that was outside my wheelhouse. So I knew that I needed a partner, and we just started looking around, started asking people we knew. And we were sitting down in a conversation one night with our friends, Johnny and Shannon, and we were talking about big dreams, crazy dreams that we had. And the topic of writing this living book for science came up. And Johnny was like, hey, wait, one of my big dreams is to write a book. And we thought, I wonder if this could work together. And that's how it all got started. So we started throwing around ideas, and Johnny came up with the idea of Blaine and Tracy Sassafras, and I started writing out the science content, and he started writing out the stories, and it just came together naturally. And that's how the Sassafras Science series began. But I also knew that a living book wasn't enough. We needed more for science. You couldn't just read the book and have that be enough. I knew that you needed to do science, you need to read about science, and you need to write about it. So we had that read component, and now what came in was the do and the read, writing the curriculum that went around the living book. So that's kind of a bit of the history of how Sassafras Science began. The Sassafras Science series all starts with an adventure-style novel. So this is the basis of what you're learning. The novel follows the twins as they zip around the world learning about science, and along the way they meet local experts who highlight different aspects of science in the journey of what area of science they're doing. So the first volume is about zoology, so they'll be learning about animals, and the local experts will share a bit more about animals. So we generally recommend that you begin with Volume 1 Zoology and read the novels in order because we have an overarching storyline that goes from the beginning all the way to the end. But if you don't want to start with zoology, you want to start with one of the other topics, you can certainly do that as we review the key parts of that overarching storyline in the beginning of each book. So each of the novels serves as a great read aloud from kindergarten up to 5th grade. Even 6th, 7th, 8th grade and up have enjoyed listening to the Sassafras Science series, but it was really geared for that K through 5th, and then the later volumes 1st through 6th grade. There will be 8 books when the series is complete. Volume 7 just came out, so we have 1 more to go. So each one's designed to take about a half a year to complete, so it'll be 4 years of Sassafras Science novels, and then we'll have something else maybe later on, but we can't talk about that quite yet. So as I said, Volume 1 is zoology, it's about animals. Volume 2 is anatomy, which is the human body. Volume 3 is botany, which is plants. Volume 4 is Earth Science, so it covers things like weather and things that are going on around the globe. Volume 5 is Geology, so we're talking rocks and things like that. Volume 6 is Astronomy. Volume 7 is Chemistry, which is a look through the periodic table, and it just came out last week. And Volume 8 will be Physics, and we have already begun work on Volume 8, so that'll be out as soon as possible. We don't have a release date for that yet. So you could read the novels alone. You could add them in at morning time just for a little bit more interest in your science studies, or you can partner them with some of the other materials we have to create a full science program. So one of the hardest parts about using a living book for science is knowing how to pull it all together, adding that do and the write component, because the read's easy. The read in the living book is easy, but knowing what to do and what to write down can get a little difficult. So that's the idea behind our support materials that will give you those other two keys for science so you know what to do. So the first thing we have is the activity guide. So this Sassafras Guide to Zoology, whatever the topic is that you are working on, each one of the volumes has a corresponding guide, and these activity guides will help you create a full science plan for your students. So they will have information for each chapter, you'll have grid schedules and a list schedule, and then it'll tell you the different things you can read. So it'll tell you the chapter, it'll give you additional reading, it'll give you what's covered in the chapter so you know what your students could write down, and then it'll give you something to do. And it's broken into those three keys, so it makes it super easy for you to locate and know what you need to do each week. And then for your students to write things down, we have the SCIDAT Logbook. So as the kids are going through the storyline, they are entering the data into their smartphones in an app called SCIDAT. That's short for Scientific Data. Your kids can have their very own logbook to go along with the twins. So these are just simple notebooking pages. They're open-ended, so they can really meet your students where they're at, and your students can write down what they are learning through their journey. Now, if that activity guide and logbook is a little bit too much for your kids, we have what we call the Lapbooking guide, the Lapbooking through guide. So each Lapbooking guide is kind of a scaled down version of the activity guide and logbook. So in the guide portion of it, you'll find something to do, something to write, something to read. So it'll give you some suggestions for each of those. It'll give you the demonstration for the week. It'll give you some vocabulary you can cover. And then it'll also give you information for Lapbook templates. And the Lapbooking templates are in the back of the guide, which your student can use to create their own Lapbook through the journey. So this is a smaller, scaled down version of the activity guide and logbook. If you have a large age range of students, you can certainly use both, but normally we recommend you choose one or the other. And then the last thing I want to show you is our coloring pages. So these came along because we had some families with younger students who wanted to participate but couldn't really write down in a Lapbook or a notebook. It was too much for them. So we have these coloring pages that your students can color while they're listening, or they can use these as their notebook. So these are really for your younger kids or for your artsy kids, but they're a black line illustration from each of the illustrations that's in the book, and then there are also sheets that have to do with each of the topics. So those are the coloring pages. And then we also have things like experiment kits and audiobooks that can help make your journey even easier with the Sassafras twins. So when you use Sassafras Science as your main science curriculum, you'll start the week by reading the chapter in the novel, and then you'll choose some related activity from either your activity guide or your Lapbooking guide. And then you'll have the students write down what they've learned from the chapter, either in their logbook or in their Lapbook. And then you can add in additional books from the library. You can add in additional activities that are suggested in the guides. You can do an activity that lasts from the beginning to the end of the book. There's usually a project for the whole thing as well. So you can add those things in as extras if you want, or you can just do the basics of read, doing, and writing. So if I was to sum up what you need for the Sassafras Science series, you need a novel first, and then you need support materials, whether it's the activity guide and the logbook or the Lapbooking guide, and that equals a bunch of science learning fun. The Sassafras Science Adventures makes it easy for you to turn a living book into a full science curriculum. But it may not be the right fit for you and your family. So this series is best for people who want to cover more than one area of science in a year. So our classic series covers one subject, so only biology. Whereas with Sassafras Science series, you'll be covering 2 different subjects per year. And that may be biology, it may be earth science, it may be chemistry, it may be physics. It's also good for families who want to teach science a little differently, who are okay with doing science outside the box. So it's definitely not a traditional approach to teaching science. It has all the keys, all the components that are necessary for teaching science. You will, over the years, cover everything you need to cover, but it's going to look a little bit different than the traditional approach to teaching science. And this series works great for those that have multiple students that you want to keep together. So for instance, if you have a 5th grader, a 2nd grader, and a 1st grader, it's really easy to combine them with the Sassafras Science series, whereas it might be a little bit more challenging if you're using something like the classical science series we have. So when you use the Sassafras Science Adventures, you don't have to worry that you're missing out on anything. You're having a journey to learn about science. It's a lot of fun for your kids, and they're learning everything they need to know as they're going through the series. If you still have a question about whether or not the Sassafras Science series could work for your situation, please don't hesitate to drop us an email at support@elementalscience.com, and we'll answer as soon as humanly possible. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great week playing with science. Thanks for listening to Season 10 of the Tips for Homeschool Science Show, which is sponsored by our company, Elemental Science. At Elemental Science, we have several series of award-winning programs, including a series with living books to help you teach science. Sassafras Science Adventures will help you enjoy a journey as you learn about science. The newest installment of the Sassafras Science series is coming out in April of 2023. This volume will be a journey through the periodic table. It's all about chemistry, which is my personal favorite subject. Head over to elementalscience.com to learn more about the Sassafras Science Adventures and see how we can help you teach science at home.